Okay, so as we've just heard from Martin, maintenance and repair are really foundational to human social and material life. A bit better. It's okay. Cleaning, caring, servicing, preserving, prolonging, these are all things that we do to keep our social and material worlds going. Perhaps the most obvious example of maintenance is the fixing of material things, but maintenance, of course, can also refer to wider social and material structures. And in the world of research, we tend to treat those things together as socio-material. So Martin invited me to talk about the kinds of academic research that are happening on maintenance and repair, at least in the social sciences. And researchers in this area study such a range of topics, of objects, both mundane and unusual, that I decided to structure my talk by picking out 4 charismatic objects to tell you a bit more about some key themes in that research. So today we're going to be talking about the mobile phone, the smart city, the space probe, and the John Deere tractor, 4 quite unlikely objects. So you'll notice that these are all technologies, and to be honest, that is because I'm a technology researcher. But I'd also argue that technology is quite a privileged site for attending to maintenance and repair. On the one hand, the breakdown of technologies is ubiquitous. In everyday usage, tech requires repair, and I'm sure you've all switched something off and switched it back on again. On the other hand, maintenance and repair are largely missing from particular narratives around technology. Think of the smart city, for example. And one reason for this is simply that we can't predict what will go wrong when we're designing something, especially a citywide system. But there's also a hefty dose of techno-solutionism in the mix. Smart urbanism, for example, itself is sold as a fix for everything from urban congestion to citizen engagement and also green growth. So technology, I think, plays a particular role in many of our societies as sites of visioning. So we're kind of creating blueprints of what we want our societies to be like. Design, engineering, imagineering, forecasting. These involve telling stories outwards to others, but these stories also make ourselves in particular ways. They pull us together as groups, whether that's in the corporate world or in communities, countries, or even in continent level. So when we exclude maintenance from these visions, we're really excluding a massive swathe of productive activity. And I agree with Martin that in an era of planetary and political kind of instability, I'd argue that maintenance and repair practices, they really are the details that we need to attend to as we move from one world order to the next, humbly and each little fix at a time. So first up is the mobile phone. So maintenance and repair of mobiles has been studied by me and also my colleagues Ishtiaq Ahmed on the far of the slide and Steve Jackson at Cornell, where we all work together. So in the past 15 years or so, a sizable mobile telecoms infrastructure has been rolled out over parts of Africa and Asia. And Ishtiaq, Steve and I, we were all keen to learn more about the people who take care of mobile phones. So I studied mobile workshops in Kampala in Uganda, and this is a picture of from my research of a mobile phone software repair happening. And Ishtiaq studied mobile repair in Dhaka in Bangladesh. So what kinds of maintenance and repair work happen in the repair workshops of downtown Kampala? Lots of mobile phones are bought on the second-hand market. They need SIM unlocking, they might need their languages changed. And in the dusty and humid climate, mobiles need regular cleaning as metal connectors oxidize and become unresponsive. And then there's a whole litany of other breakdowns, from cracked screens to software glitches and sets that won't turn on. And many of the tools and techniques required to maintain and repair mobile phones are easily accessible in Kampala. Cleaning the oxidization from metal contacts on the phone is easily done with a toothbrush and solvent, and that's something that you or I would be allowed to help with in the repair workshops. But some fixes require really specialist tools. For example, software repair problems are often fixed by gaining access to the embedded systems of the phone, deleting the software from the flash memory and rewriting a new uncorrupted copy of the firmware. This technique, it really requires specialist tools and firmware files, but these are often withheld by manufacturers, so they're not available in the public domain. So whilst the mobile handsets themselves circulate freely, they do global travel, the kind of knowledge about device design tends to stay in the orbit of manufacturers. So what do technicians in Kampala do when they're working independently, outside of corporate authorized networks, and actually massively geographically far from sites of design? Well, they actually rely on DIY, peer-produced, informal knowledge and craft practices, sometimes by hanging out at each other's workshops, sharing, but also access via online communities like this. These are sites where schematics, manuals, and firmware files, like this is a Nokia hardware library by Black Attack, and of course cracking and hacking tools are shared. Help threads can be searched for clues about tricky breakdowns. And you can see this is an example of how to circumvent a broken part using fine copper wire, a technique called jumpering. So these really form an alternative knowledge infrastructure for technicians, and they help technicians to piece together a livelihood repair by repair. So in what might be called the margins, maintenance and repair are firstly more likely to be required, yet at the same time doing the maintenance and repair work might also be much more difficult than in other places. So when thinking about maintenance and repair, the global view really matters because it highlights massive global asymmetries. We can think of maintenance and repair as being unevenly distributed around the globe. And of course, the experience of technology innovation is too. The experience of being a mainstream kind of big tech consumer is rather more seamless in some places than others. Contrast, for example, being a mobile phone user in California versus Kampala. So Steve's book chapter, Rethinking Repair, argues that these kinds of stories about repair from what we might call the margins provide really important counterpoints to, as Martin mentioned, the valorization of innovation and newness that tend to emerge from technology centers of design like Silicon Valley. So Steve asks, what happens when we take erosion, breakdown, and decay rather than novelty, growth, and progress as our starting points for thinking through the nature, use, and effects of information technology and new media? And this is an approach that he calls broken world thinking. So he's really asking what would happen if maintenance and repair had the same central status as innovation. He's asking us to undertake a thought experiment to think through what might change and what might shift about our values. So broken world thinking aims to make visible maintenance and repair work in the context of the kind of asymmetries that we've just been talking about. And it calls attention to the value of these activities, insisting that they're central to the ways that we experience technology, all of us. And with that in mind, they have a lot to teach designers. Okay, moving down a scale from broken worlds to broken cities. And the second object that I want to talk about is the smart city. So thinking about the city brings questions, I think, of power and accountability to the fore, particularly in relation to public space. And I know we're going to hear more about that pretty soon in other talks. So whose responsibility actually is it to maintain and repair public space and public infrastructure? And does this actually even get done? How are citizens given a say in the management of these collective sites and resources? So a scholar called Sebastian Areta engages with these questions in a study about the introduction of a new smart transportation system to Santiago in Chile. A master plan was developed by the authorities to roll out a whole host of new services, a new bus fleet, bus stop design, new smart payment card, and much more. And this project was called Trans Santiago. And of course, the introduction of Trans Santiago did not go according to plan. And Areta describes how there were not enough buses available, the contactless payment system broke down, and even the users were malfunctioning because they stood outside the new bus stops and queued to get a seat, rather than standing up in the new roomier buses that were designed to get them more quickly from place to place. So users called for the authorities to repair Transantiago, and Areta shows how repairing Transantiago required the authorities to discipline all of the unruly elements back into their roles that they had been allocated in the master plan. Well, almost because the users could only be partially repaired, and they ended up designing a new hybrid bus stop for the sitters and the standers. But Areta uses this example to reflect on the kinds of power relations involved in maintenance and repair, and he suggests that we tend to treat maintenance and repair as something inherently good, and perhaps we researchers even romanticize it a bit. He argues that maintenance and repair are always engaged in normalization, meaning simply that maintenance and repair work, it always returns something to a normal or a preferred state. When we think about the mobile, it's pretty uncontroversial to think about a normal mobile, it's working or it isn't. But when we get into debates about public space or how public infrastructure should be organized, it's clear that there are a lot more possibilities and politics at stake. So who does the normal order work for? Who does it benefit? And conversely, who does it exclude and marginalize? So in Areta's example, the top-down power of the authority is brought to bear on Transantiago. He says the ultimate aim of such practices is usually not only the improvement of the system, but centrally the maintenance of a certain kind of power. So maintenance and repair are normalization in this case. But I couldn't resist including a few examples where, rather than the top-down power of normalization, repair and maintenance also do a little bit of bottom-up subversion, where neglect on the part of the authorities causes citizens to take matters into their own hands. And even smart cities can't escape potholes, and it seems to be the potholes that galvanize the citizen repairers to do this kind of bottom-up, more subversive forms of maintenance. So in Rome, the GAP organization stealthily returned broken parts of the city to their normal functioning, with only just this little logo left as a trail of their authorship. And these citizens are really deciding for themselves what normal should look like and actually going out and putting that into practice. In the UK, Wanksy, riffing on the better-known street art counterpart Banksy, sprays genitals around potholes using their lewd nature to make them more visible. And firstly, that's for citizens to see and avoid them. But undoubtedly, that's also to embarrass authorities and to point out their failure to act. And finally, Chicago mural artist Jim Bachor turns potholes into decorative street art pieces. And here, maintenance really does produce something new, something beautiful and valuable. So it's clear that maintenance and repair are not always ethically positive acts. They can be used to sustain forms of control that might not be desirable. When does maintenance conform things back to normal? But when, like this amazing picture of Aretha Franklin, does it enact something a bit more transformative? So from the city, we're now traveling light years into space to our third object, which is the space probe, studied by Marissa Cohn. And her work really asks us to consider the ends of things. And I think in general, we tend to naturalize the ends of objects or systems. It's all entropy. All things will fall apart in the fullness of time. But the ends of things can be really active choices, and how those decisions are made and by whom they actually matter, and also they tell us a lot about ourselves and our societies. So the space probe that Cohn studied was launched in 1997 to explore a distant planet over 1.2 billion kilometers from Earth. And the craft spent more than 20 years in space before it finally burned up in 2017 as its mission kept getting extended. So at launch, the systems on board were really cutting edge technologies, and they represented a flagship mission with a large and complex team of developers. That's what Marissa tells us in her work. But after launch, the life of the project within the space agency moves from this development phase into operations, and that's the work of flying and maintaining the craft. So since the craft is so far out of reach, the software on board was only able to be updated in very limited ways by the operations team, because if any bugs developed, they just simply couldn't be fixed, unlike Star Trek. And Cohn calls the spacecraft a geriatric infrastructure, and she shows how the work of maintaining it involves programming tasks that are really unlikely to be practiced in any other sites. For example, manually reading hex code. So she talks about how it's as if time stops or slows for particular forms of labor on the mission as technology rapidly moves on across the rest of the organization. Yet staying with the craft as it journeys through space also produces profoundly interesting forms of engineering knowledge. So Cohn argues that these two forms of work, development and operations, represent career trajectories with very different kind of temporal commitments. Development work, that's the design and the engineering of the craft, runs in these really tight cycles where engineers stay involved in the very newest thing. Whereas operations work, that involves dropping out and staying with the craft as it ages and decays. So Cohn suggests that these roles themselves are also kind of devalued by their association with obsolescing technologies. And for me, her work is a brilliant example of the way different forms of visibility and value are ascribed to design versus maintenance work. So Cohn's work really pushes against the prevailing ideas that technology development is a linear trajectory where learning happens up front in the design stage and not in the work of maintenance. Of course, as the final end of the mission approaches, it's actually the agedness of the craft that has become remarkable again, as it's endured the vacuum of space so much longer than other objects. And ironically, it's this status that kind of pushes it back into the terrain of the technological cutting edge. So for me, Cohn's work really beautifully surfaces two really important concerns. Firstly, the temporality of maintenance and repair work and the difficulties that we living at human scale have of comprehending these longer lived relationships, even taking into consideration a lifetime spent in a particular career. And secondly, this key question that Martin also raised about the visibility and the value of maintenance work. How and why does this form of labour become less visible and less valuable than other forms? So the fourth and final object is the John Deere tractor, and this has really become totemic in the USA in the fight for a right to repair digital products. So in recent decades, agriculture has not only become big business, it's become actually a big data business. So farming equipment, such as the John Deere tractor, has been instrumented, it's been kitted out with sensor systems and data processors that harvest data and are used for prediction. So these machines were once fully mechanical and therefore totally open to tinkering. So farmers or someone in the local farming community, they're really likely to have had the knowledge to maintain and repair this vintage John Deere tractor. But today, farmers are prevented from accessing their machines in three important ways. Firstly, the computers on board are password protected, so farmers can't physically get access to parts of the system. Secondly, the system falls under US copyright law, which is on the broader side. Software code is copyrightable, and it's not legal to circumvent any technological protection measures, such as the kind of password protection that's been installed. And thirdly, since tractor software is licensed rather than sold, John Deere use end-user licensing agreements to control what farmers are permitted to do with the machines that they own. Yes, these are the same EULAs that you'll have scrolled through when you sign up for a software or service online. Scroll, and click yes, I agree. So that actually happens with farming equipment too. So what this means in practice is that if a farmer wants to repair their John Deere tractor, they need to call in a specialist John Deere repair technician. So for many malfunctions or breakdowns, farmers are simply not permitted to either use an independent technician or to undertake repair of their own machinery themselves. So farmers and also right to repair activists, and that is a coalition like repair.org, and I think we have some right to repair affiliates in the audience, and that includes aftermarket, civil liberties, and consumer groups. They've been arguing that these kind of arrangements are monopolistic in their effects. So the effect of being tied in by these particular forms of control is that you can't take your services elsewhere. So it creates this kind of distorted and asymmetric market. So the Right to Repair Coalition have been fighting on several different fronts to get a right to repair enshrined in law. So that would mean that you, as the owner of a tool or technology, should have the right to access onboard software systems for the purposes of maintaining or fixing your stuff. So right to repair legislation is being discussed in 20 states now, and this would allow independent technicians and equipment owners to have access to the same manuals, schematics, and diagnostic tools that the authorized service providers have. So it would act to redress the kind of asymmetries in the market. And it also kind of guarantees a supply of spare parts for a fixed number of years. And of course, the bonus ability to access software systems to repair your own stuff without breaking the law. So it's turned into a bit of a cat and mouse game. This is the wall of text EULA that we've been talking about. So in 2015, Right to Repair activists won the battle to make an exemption to US copyright law for personal tractors repairs. So farmers won new rights in law to be able to fix their own stuff. But immediately after, John Deere just altered this EULA to roll these new rights back. So we really are in this situation where there's a kind of cat and mouse game where I get new rights this way and then they're foreclosed in that way. And actually this story has to remain unfinished because right to repair has not been achieved yet. However, momentum is growing because there's something about the John Deere tractor and the plight of farmers that's really captured the imagination in the US, and it's really kind of helped to form this very wide coalition of lawmakers and citizens, including the Democratic hopeful Elizabeth Warren. So should she unseat President Trump in 2020, then perhaps the right to repair can go federal, and repair will have protections in law, and I think that's going to be really influential worldwide. So for me, the right to repair really matters because the kinds of network technologies used in the tractor cab are increasingly making their way into our home appliances. So when everyday appliances get augmented with software, they come under these kinds of legal and technological control. And one example that I'll give you is Nest, the smart home company, that's a Google Alphabet company that you might know, bought its competitor Revolve, and less than 2 years later, remotely killed its flagship product, the Smart Home Hub. So customers woke up one day to a dead technology, and actually Nest only offered Revolve customers a refund after a lot of negative press. So this Internet of Things future that we're supposed to be on the cusp of, we really don't want that to be an Internet of e-waste future. It's really important that sustainability gets built into these network devices by design. So the questions that we might think about is where should the balance be drawn between freedom and control over devices, and what role should regulators play? And for me, these are questions that are going to become massively more salient in the coming years. So finally, to draw all these threads and objects together, I must say, I didn't know Martin's introduction, but my takeaway is it's clear we're living on a damaged planet that is itself in need of a fix, And that's going to require finding new ways of living and consuming. And maintenance and repair do provide a really productive ground for thinking about how we're going to approach this challenge. So in his article about broken world thinking, Steve writes that foregrounding maintenance and repair invites not only new functional but also moral relations to the world of technology and ethics of mutual care and responsibility. So we can look to mobile phone repair cultures in Kampala to see one version of this unfold. Repairs there are by their nature small scale, repair by any means necessary, saving each device. They're very materially frugal enterprises that reuse parts, where technicians really rely on each other to co-produce and to pool knowledge. And this really careful work, careful materially engaged work, that's certainly one aspect of sustainability, and it's slowing the loop by lengthening product lifetimes. But planetary repairs are also going to require system change, and Areta's work on the smart city helps us turn our attention to, well, what is normal and who actually is it good for? At times, maintenance might need to give way to something more transformative as we decide what orders to uphold and what to let go of. So maintenance and repair are so important because they kind of link the past to the future, how things are handed down to us and how we hand them on. So often we focus on human lifetimes, but Cohn's work on the space probe brings planetary lifetimes into view, and it really provides productive ways to think at geological scale about preservation. Okay, what are we working together to preserve? It's this planet. And finally, the John Deere tractor raises the question of rights, but also responsibilities. Does gaining new rights to repair also come with new responsibilities to repair? So thanks very much for your attention, and I'm really interested to how these conversations are going to unfold in our day together.